Welcome to the first of our two workshops. We are Mark Battle and Rebecca Lincoln. We are co-chairs of the Brunswick Climate Action Task Force. Climate change is real and it's happening now, and as residents of Brunswick, we need to ask ourselves difficult questions. How are we going to minimize the consequences of climate change? And how are we going to deal with the consequences that we can avoid? The town of Brunswick is devising a plan, a climate action plan to answer these questions. And when I say the town, I mean we, all of us, together.
So we have two goals tonight. We want to inform you about the process of creating this climate action plan for the town, and we want you to inform us, tell us what, where, and who the plan should focus on. The feedback you give us tonight will shape the plan that will then go to the town council for adoption, and it's critically important that you be here so your voices can be heard and adopted into the final plan for the town. That leads directly to introductions and thanks, and so if I call your name out, please raise your hand so we can all acknowledge the hard work that has gone into this so far. The actual day-to-day work of this planning process is being done primarily by Brunswick's environmental planner, the tireless Ashley Carlson. Thanks for coming. Amazing work. Thank you. For technical expertise, the town has contracted with the nonprofit Greater Portland Council of Governments, GPCOG, who you'll be hearing from next. And the creation of the Climate Action Plan is overseen by a task force of Brunswick citizens. Tom Rumpf, the vice chair, who I did just see. There he is. Tom Rumpf. Thank you. Jamie Ecker, Jenna Muzzy, Lissa Pelletier, who's here. There she is. Adam C. Gillet, Aaron Turkle, Melissa Wong, as well as Jen Hicks and Steve Walker, our town council representatives. Thank you for being here. And ourselves, Mark Battle and Rebecca Lincoln, the co-chairs. And we've also I also want to give a big shout out and thanks to a Bowdoin student, Addison Davis, who interned with the town this summer and provided a lot of help and effort towards the final product. So thank you all.
So those are the introductions. Our thanks. Pardon me?
Talking into the mic is good.
Okay. Our thanks go to all of these people who have put in many, many hours of work, the ones we just mentioned. In addition, we want to thank Wild Oats Bakery and Cafe, Dunkin' Donuts, the Marine Resources Committee, who brought the clam chowder, Spindleworks, Sopo Seafood, and the town of Brunswick, who've all provided goods and services and material support for this evening. So thanks to those. And most of all, we want to thank you for showing up and helping craft the climate action plan. Finally, before departing this evening, be sure to participate in our door prize raffle and take our survey. The survey can also be completed online. Just by showing up, you'll be entered in the raffle, and the more you participate in the planning processes, the better your chances of winning. With that said, we'll turn things over to the Greater Portland Council of Governments for the rest of the evening.
Welcome again. Well, this is loading up. I am Kelly Rayberg. I am the Sustainability Program Manager with the Greater Portland Council of Governments. We are contracted right now with the town of Brunswick to create the Climate Action Plan, and this is funded through a grant from the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future through the Community Resilience Partnership. It's a great turnout. We're extremely glad to see all of you here. I've already seen a lot of you wandering around. Have no fear. I will talk a little more about what you are seeing on the walls around here, how to get involved, and how to get feedback. So after the presentation, there will be plenty more time to put all of your thoughts, feedbacks, sticky notes. We really, at the end of the day, want to see the walls covered in your thoughts and ideas. And with that, we'll dive right in. So what I'm going to talk to you about for the next 30, 40 minutes, we'll keep it brief. I know we don't always like to just sit and listen to someone talk. I don't always like to hear my own voice, so I can imagine. We're going to just cover basics: climate change, climate impacts. What are we seeing? What is the town already seeing? What could we predict for the future? We're going to talk through the climate action planning process. So what is the town, GPCOG, the committee, all of you doing throughout all of this process, and what does it mean, and what are the next steps? We're going to talk about the data that we've already collected, and that kind of goes into the posters and some of the materials that you'll see on the wall. And then we'll really break out into activities to allow you to give that feedback. We'll come back at the end if you'd like to do a little report back to understand what are we hearing, and answer some questions from you as well. So just to set the stage, our climate is changing. As Mark said, it is time that we do something about it. So kind of a pro-con is the greenhouse effect. It makes Earth livable in that it keeps we have an atmosphere, it keeps the Earth warm enough for us to live on. But unfortunately, the more we burn fossil fuels, the more we put out carbon dioxide, methane, those greenhouse gases, it's going to trap more of those sun's rays and heat up the Earth even more. It's going to make the Earth hot and alter a lot of different systems, whether that's temperature, precipitation, ocean currents, wind patterns. We'll see it all. And what we really are seeing is that human activity is playing a role in that. And so how do we take that and adapt? So what are we seeing in terms of climate change? What does that mean? It means that we are seeing more intense storms. We're seeing flooding and drought and heat waves. And that impacts all of areas of our lives. And I'm going to dive into a little bit of the data as to what are we seeing specifically in Maine. But a lot of it is understanding that we have impacts to our infrastructure, from buckling roadways from heat, to property damage from flooding, to strains on our ecosystem and wildlife, water quality issues, all things that we find valuable to our communities. So what are we experiencing in Maine? What is the data telling us so far that we are seeing, and what do we think we can do in the future? So since 1895, temperatures have risen over 3 degrees, and it's most pronounced along the coast. And we can expect another 3.5 to 4 degrees rise by 2050. And with that comes a range of impacts. A lot of it public health, heat stroke, and heat-related illnesses. We're seeing more ticks, vector-borne diseases, because we aren't having those cold spells in the winter to help them die off. We're seeing worsening air pollution, and that's also then putting strain on our ecosystems. We are seeing a shift in seasons, so we've seen about a 2-week shift, or longer season for warming for the summer, and so that can help agriculture grow more, but we also have negatives from precipitation, which I'll talk about in a minute, but that's going to impact tourism. Maybe more summer tourists, but also that's going to hurt winter tourism. We're seeing less snow, there's less cold months. Anyone who skiing, snowboarding, winter recreation is going to take a hit, and those who rely on the economy for winter plowing driveways won't be making as much money. We're also seeing more rain, and it's falling more as rain and less as snow. So precipitation has increased by 15% since 1895, and it's coming more frequently as intense short bursts as well. And so with that, we have these really high intensity storms, and then we might have periods of drought. We had a lot of drought last year, and then this year we had a bunch of rain in June, which I know also hurt some of the tourist industry because no one wanted to go out on the weekends because it was very rainy. And that, again, has the range of impacts. It's going to flood roadways. It's going to damage infrastructure. With these extreme storms, there's going to be more wind, knocking down power lines, causing property damage. Overburdening wastewater systems, any water systems, and then any impacts to your properties, it's going to affect the tax base as well. So it's not always just an individual problem, it's a town problem and a regional problem. And then, since you are lucky enough to be a coastal town, we are seeing rising sea levels. Higher sea levels over the course means that we will see more flooding during storms, but also more sunny day flooding. That means it can be a nice, really sunny day out, and all of a sudden you say, why is the pier flooded? That's because of sea level rise. One of the closer gauges in Portland has seen that the sea levels have risen 7.5 inches since 1912. And again, we're expecting that to continue, where the state is projecting to, I'm gonna get the wording wrong, commit to manage at 1.6 feet by 2050, prepare for 3.3 feet of sea level rise. And that, again, we impact your properties, it's going to impact the coast, it's going to impact any ecosystems along there, and again, strain all of the infrastructure, the tax base. You'll see I'm kind of like a broken record at this point, saying the same things over and over. And the final hazard that I'll talk about right now is the changing ocean conditions. The Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 99% of the world's oceans, which is a little staggering to some. If you say, we're just up in Maine, what's going on? And the way one time it was explained to me is, it's not always sure why we're warming faster, but part of it is the jet stream, and when you have a really big hose, like a fireman's hose, and it's blowing, or it's streaming fast, it's in a tight, narrow line. When you warm the ocean, the pressure that's coming out of that hose is going to kind of slow down, and then not everything's in a nice stream, and it starts seeping out. And that's kind of where the Gulf of Maine lies, is that we are warming because we're seeing an effect even further in the ocean. And one impact that this has is on the fishing industry and the aquaculture industry, something that's really big to Brunswick. And so we'll see a decline in marine species. We're already seeing kind of shifting lobster habitat. We've seen a decline in lobster, we've seen an increase in green crabs and invasive species, and that can impact your economy. So hopefully I haven't doom and gloomed you too much, because there are things we can do to make this better. You know, it can be a scary thing, but we want to say that there's ways that we can adapt, ways that we can help, and especially as a town, what do you want to do? What steps do you want to take? And part of that is really creating a plan and making decisive action now. And so your town stepping into creating a climate action plan is really a great step towards helping these and making sure that you have a sustainable town to continue to live. So that brings us to the climate action planning process. What are you doing here tonight? What am I doing here? And what are we going to do going forward? So a climate action plan. The goal of the plan is to really develop strategies to help reduce your emissions, build that resilience, and prepare you for climate change, for you to be able to adapt to any of these changing situations, and hopefully mitigate some of those impacts. And in the end, it's going to really support a lot of your community goals. And it's going to create a vibrant, sustainable, healthy Brunswick. And that's really what we want to see. And so, as Mark and Rebecca nicely talked about, a lot of it is led really by the Brunswick Climate Action Task Force that was created for this project. So you might see them out and about tabling. You obviously got all of their messages to come to the meeting tonight, so thank you very much. And then it's also being led town staff, Ashley, and GP-COG. But the real bulk of it is we want you to help shape the plan, to know what is going on, what do you want to see. So it's the one slide to say that everyone needs to do their part, okay? This is not just a one person does things. This is not a, we don't want to just tell you what to do. Tell us what to do. Tell us how you want to see that, to see the plan shaped. Tell us where your concerns are and what's going on. This is kind of big slide, but this is a general process for what we are leading the town through. So we start with data collection, understanding what does the data tell us, and how do we get all of those sources. Starts with making sure we have a task force on board, planning a lot of community engagement, and then we go through kind of the baseline report. So that's a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, that's a vulnerability assessment, and I'll tell you that this is where we are today within that process. So we've already interviewed town staff. We've talked to them about what they're interested in seeing, what they're concerned about, and now we also want to hear from you. We're working through the preliminary results of the greenhouse gas inventory, which I'll talk about in just a minute, and some of the vulnerability data. And towards the end, I'll talk about next steps. But we're a good ways through the process, and so we want to make sure that we have you involved and you tell us what we should know. Because as I said, this is Brunswick's plan. This is not just the task force plan. This is not a municipal staff plan. This is not a GP-COG plan. This is a town of Brunswick plan, and you all are the town of Brunswick. So let us know. Brunswick's greenhouse gas emissions. So as part of the process, GP-COG collects a bunch of data from the town, from utilities, from communities, and run it through a modeling software called ClearPath. And it's essentially an estimate. Every model is going to be an estimate, so it's not going to be an exact science, but it gives us a rough estimate as to what your town's greenhouse gas emissions are. And we look at that at stationary energy, meaning buildings, mostly buildings, residential, commercial buildings, transportation, both passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles, and waste. And all of those together provide you with a total emissions. And the goal then is hopefully to reduce those over time. So through our models and calculations, the town of Brunswick, total emissions are estimated at almost 241,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So carbon dioxide equivalent means that we've taken the different types of greenhouse gases, so take for example methane, and kind of converted that to the emissions factor similar to carbon dioxide, so we give you one number. Because carbon dioxide is not the only greenhouse gas, but we convert it all so it's the same. So your emissions right now are equivalent to the carbon dioxide absorbed by over 10,000 acres of trees in 1 year. So that's a lot of trees that's doing a lot of work for you. But if we also break that down by per person, Brunswick is actually faring pretty well across the state. So we've done a couple of these other inventories, a couple other towns have looked at their emissions as well. And Brunswick is actually one of the lowest, and some of that is due to the size, potential density of you have a downtown that is a little more walkable, and things that we're still looking at. But it's relatively on par with a couple of the other towns as well. And that's not to say that you're doing A+ job and we can't do anything else to solve it. But right now, you're doing comparatively well, and obviously this is a small snapshot of towns. But compared to the state, which has a lot more rural areas, it's looking pretty good. So overall, you're at about 241,000 emissions, and that involves all manners. So we look at electricity, we look at natural gas, we look at different fuel types, and different waste, talking with Maine and things of that sort. And again, we will have more time for questions and clarification and things of that sort. But let's dive a little deeper into what those emissions kind of break down into. So So at the community level, you actually are 56% of your emissions comes from your stationary energy, so your buildings, which is interesting because the state of Maine, transportation is generally the largest emitter. And part of that might be due to, again, you have a little more of a downtown, you have a little denser areas, and so people aren't driving as much within towns. But you still have a large source from passenger vehicles, and then residential and commercial buildings, and a very small bit from waste. We also then separated out and looked at just municipal operations. So if we're looking at the town staff and saying, the public works building, town hall, municipal fleets, how is the municipal and government operating, and also the school district, so school buildings, school buses, those are all kind of combined. Again, that's stationary energy, and that's mostly because of the school buildings, followed closely by transportation again. However, on the big picture, the municipal and school district only make up about 1.5% of the total community emissions. So they're not emitting that much comparatively, but we still want to get them down. I'm going to take each of those pie graphs and dive even a little deeper. So for those stationary energy, if I go back one slide, so that big 56%, if we break that down even further, residential is making up 26% of the total community. Commercial is 28%, and industrial, very small. So it's actually interesting that you have higher emissions from your commercial buildings than your residential. But transportation, unsurprisingly, passenger vehicles is the most, and it's actually tied with commercial buildings as well at 28%. And waste, again, is a very small percentage. So we have this information now, okay? We've collected the information directly from utilities, directly from municipal staff. Some of it is estimated and modeled, and we encourage you to ask more questions on it. I know this is very high level, and that's why we have stations, which we'll talk through. But the question then is, what do we do about it? You now know, okay, we have a lot of buildings emitting greenhouse gases that are running on oil, not as fuel efficient. What are we going to do? And so what we would like is for the town to consider emission reduction targets. The state has done that as part of their climate action plan. Maine won't wait. And so we presented to the task force a range of options and different areas, different scenarios that they could potentially choose to bring to council. And if you take the community survey, small plug if you haven't already, take it, it will ask you a similar question. This is saying, where do you want to set potential emission reduction targets? How are we going to reduce our emissions? What do we want to see for the future? And so right now we have modeled 2 emission reduction targets. And there will be a poster that you can kind of look at and compare a little as to what that means. And so one, I'll start with actually the one on your right, that align with Maine won't wait. It's been normalized for the baseline. We can talk through a little what that means. But essentially, big picture is we would try and hit a 30% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030 and a 75% reduction by 2050. Another option would be aligning with the International Climate Agreement. So a lot of countries and towns have gotten together and said, we need to be a little more aggressive. We are looking at the projections. We are seeing that this is a problem. We really want to push things forward. And so they've come up with a model, and they've also scaled it to kind of wealthier nations, more developed nations, to be able to take on a little bit of that. And so these targets would be a 65% reduction by 2030 and a net zero reduction by 2050. And the one thing I'll mention is these targets and this inventory is really meant as a starting point. One, it's all preliminary, so don't want to say that anything is completely set in stone or anything's going on, but it's a starting point to really think about those other actions. How do we then, what do we do to actually reduce those emissions? What outreach do we do? What steps do we take? What incentives can we do? And so, as I said, it's not going to be a complete perfect science, but it gives you the big picture and the understanding of what's going on. And then we really want you to kind of give us feedback and understand what kind of reduction do you want to see? Do you want to see a reduction? Do you want to be aggressive and push past the state? Do you want to be with the state? On the posters, we also have some examples of what other towns are doing, and we're happy to talk through those as well. Then the other side, so one baseline is kind of the GHG inventory. The other side of it is vulnerability. And that can be in terms of infrastructure, ecosystems, and people. All of the different ways as to how Brunswick can respond and adapt to climate change. So just to kind of set the stage a little, make sure we're all on the same page, climate hazards are the actual impact of the climate. So that's that increasing temperature, the changing precipitation, sea level rise, and your vulnerabilities then are what is existing in you both kind of as people, as a town, and that both of those make up your climate impacts. Because not everyone is going to experience climate change equally. Your existing vulnerabilities are going to impact how you feel the effects of climate change. You know, I could say Brunswick has a little, you know, has a rockier coast, especially, you know, as we're getting kind of up towards the mid-coast. It's relatively elevated. You don't have as many of those beachy areas, and so the sea level is going to rise equally. But a place like Scarborough, which is really low-lying, has a lot of marsh, is going to feel much more of an impact from sea level rise than maybe Brunswick will because of your existing coastline. That is an example of a type of different vulnerability. Another one, for example, would be age. You know, Maine is one of the older states. People who are often older might have more pre-existing conditions. They're a little more susceptible to heat-related illnesses. And so those hotter temperatures are going to be felt more extremely by someone with a pre-existing condition than someone who doesn't. And so your existing vulnerabilities is going to play a factor into how you feel climate change. So understanding where your vulnerabilities are as a community are important to understand where to put resources and how to respond. So one I mentioned is people. We've pulled facts and figures from the US Census, which again has its limitations. Unless we go door to door and can get everyone on a really good day to respond to us, we're going to have to use estimates. And this is what we have for the best available. So we are looking at a range of social vulnerabilities like age, health, income. All of those impact how you feel climate change. So 21% of Brunswick's population is 65 and older, and of those who are 65 and older, 37% live alone. If you are older and live alone, you might be the definition of health and be much healthier than me. I'm not trying to say that you're not, but a lot of times you might also be a little more isolated. Sometimes those people might have harder time having access to a vehicle. If there's a flooding event, do they know how to evacuate? Are they going to get those communication systems? Similarly, people under 18 years old often rely on others to get around. Their parents, their guardians, they also might be outdoors more and have more health problems and feel the impacts more. So we have to be concerned about them. Heating fuel. I think depending on the type of fuel you have in your home, I'm sure you have felt the price shocks of oil and different methods of heating. 53% of houses in Brunswick are heated by fuel oil or kerosene. So not only does that impact emissions, it's going to also impact your wallet and going to impact your vulnerability. And then housing and affordability. So we look at those who are cost burdened, which means that you spend 30% or more of your income on housing costs, whether that's a mortgage or rent. And 23% of homeowners in Brunswick are cost burdened. Comparatively, 45% of renters are cost burdened. Renters can be a very vulnerable population. Sometimes they're more transient. They're not as connected to the community, so they might not have those communications to be able to respond to a climate event and know where to go. Or if, something damages their apartment, they don't have as easy enough a time to repair or move on or find additional housing. So your social vulnerability plays a big factor into how you respond to climate change. Then we also have infrastructure and ecosystems, which I'll just touch on. Brunswick has over 3,000 acres of conserved land, which sounds great. Sounds like a lot of acres, but that's about 10% of the total town area. And so we can always work to increase that. Conserved area, say open space, parks, forests, they're good carbon sinks, meaning that they suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And they help improve air quality. They can help improve water quality. They also provide a nice place for you to go and relax and people to get outside, get moving, get active. And so making sure that we have areas that don't just develop constantly are important. Looking at marsh migration. So tidal marshes are an important ecosystem to help support marine species and provide buffers from those sea level rises that storm surge along the coast. That way it absorbs a lot of the water and prevents damage to the properties around it. But as sea level rises, any of those tidal marshes are going to try and migrate inland. And if there is just a bunch of properties, developed land, walls, hard infrastructure, there's going to be nowhere for them to migrate, and the properties are going to be more vulnerable. And so ensuring that anywhere you have tidal marshes, that you might have conserved land around there, that they're allowed to migrate as the sea level rises. Brunswick has a decent amount of marsh migration in certain areas. We have a map for you to look at. I know it's a little hard to see, but as the sea level rises, there will be areas that will need to be monitored for marsh migration. On the infrastructure side of things, you have buildings and properties and roadways that can experience flooding in the case of an event. So GPCOG has partnered with First Street Foundation for their flood factor model. So that really looks at inland flooding at 2050, so a 100-year storm at 2050. We are expecting that with the increase in precipitation, inland flooding is going to get worse. Across Maine, we've actually seen, or we've heard a lot about sea level rise, which is a factor, coastal erosion, things of that sort. But one of your greatest impacts is going to come from inland flooding. As the Androscoggin, different creeks flood the areas. And so understanding where those impacts might be can help set up some methods and some strategies in the future. We have a map for that as well. Same with roads. So looking at these projections, and again, they're all projections, we could see over 150 roads experience some sort of flooding. That might mean then that emergency services can't get through. It might strand people in their neighborhood if they need to access food and other resources. So really looking at where are those important infrastructure and what are the vulnerabilities with it. Okay. I think I've been speeding through this, and I apologize. I'm sure you will have tons of questions, but I know everyone kind of wants to also break out. So what are the steps? How are we going to accomplish our goals? And what are we going to do about this? Back to this lovely slide. As I said, right now we are in the first community workshop. So we are going to take everything we hear today and we are going to put it into the reports, and we are going to start then drafting strategies and actions. And so that's where, if I've been going through and I've said something about the data and you look at a map and you go, that doesn't seem right, tell us, write it down. Because as I said, a lot of this is preliminary, a lot of it is projection, a lot of it is from census or other regional sources that are not as town specific, and they're not on the ground as much as you. And so we want to know, is this correct? Is this wrong? What are we missing? And so we're going to take all of that and put it into these reports. And then we're going to start figuring out what are the actions and strategies we can do to move forward. That we say, okay, you have these flooded roads, what can we do? Okay, you have greenhouse gas emissions, you have chosen a target. What does that mean? Does that mean more sidewalks, promoting more bike lanes? And we're going to start developing strategies with the task force, and then we're going to hold another workshop, most likely in January, where we're going to bring a lot of those actions and strategies back to you, and you can tell us, yes, that is what I want. You can tell us no, and you can tell us what about something else, and we're going to talk about prioritizing them a little more as well. So should those be something we focus on right away versus long term? So this is, again, workshop is looking more at the baseline, understanding what are our concerns, what are we seeing, and the second workshop will focus a little more on the actual strategies and actions. That's not to say if you have a brilliant idea, please write it down. I know if it pops in your head, write it down. It's better to share it now, multiple times. We'll take it anytime. And all of that information then is going to go into a final climate action plan. This will end up taking a little more than 12 months from the start, but the end goal is that hopefully the town council should adopt a climate action plan and that you can move forward. So now the exciting bit, to get you up and moving around if you would like, is all of the workshop activities. What are all these posters going on, and what can you do about it? How can you provide this feedback? So I'll start with, for those who are listening to the recording, all of the exhibits that are around the room, you can go to www.brunswickclimateaction.com. And this is for everyone else who, I know you're going to be so enthused and go back and tell your neighbors, hey, what did I just hear? You have to go comment on this. Go to the website. There's a tab called Community Workshop. And on there are all of these posters, all of the information, and an interactive online board that you can go and provide comments and sticky notes and dots. So spread the word and make sure you take the community survey. For those in person, I'll start over here to my left, your right. We have our greenhouse gas inventory posters. So a lot of the same information that I presented, but you can go dive in a little deeper to the data, to the materials, and then to those reduction targets and strategies. If you have comments and questions, take a Post-it note, put it on. But what we'd also like to see is take a dot, and on the far left poster, we have the two kind of reduction strategies. Put a dot on which one that you support. Thank you, John. John is from GPCOG. He will also be there to answer all of your burning GHG questions. And if you want to see on the far right poster, the initial survey responses to the question of emission reduction targets, what the rest of your community is thinking. But you can go explore that, provide a dot to show your support. If you don't support any, you can also write a Post-it note and let us know and why and what your thoughts are. Along the rest of the wall on that right side for you discusses all sorts of vulnerabilities. The ecosystem vulnerabilities, the social vulnerabilities, the infrastructure vulnerabilities. So take your time, you can walk through there. I will be over there to answer any of your questions. Again, is there something that we're missing? Is there something that you really want us to know about? I will say again, these are not exhaustive, so there are additional areas that within the full report we will be looking at a little more on wastewater, different ecosystem migrations, economic impacts, things of that sort. But if there's something that's concerning to you or something that pops into your head, let us know. As I said, Post-it notes are our friends. We want to see these things covered. In the center of the room, you may have walked in and you said, wow, this is a map of Brunswick. What am I supposed to do? Tell us any specific location of something that you love and want to see protected. A place that you're concerned about. Maybe your home floods all of the time, or you always drive a road that every time that road floods, put a dot or circle it right on the map. Is there some place, a park, that you see a ton of invasive species? Circle that, put it down, write invasive species. Anywhere that you think is a concern or a priority, something that you want to see in town. Is there, kind of an area of town with people that you are concerned about? Maybe you're like, hey, I'm not really sure about the population in this. Are they connected to our community? Are they going to be able to be okay during a storm event? Let us know. Anything goes. On the table, kind of just past the food, are more general questions. So a lot of this is, I have a thought, I have a comment, I don't always know where it goes. Put it over there, post a note. There's other guiding questions. So, we want to know, are you already taking action, and how? Do you have a generator that is going to make you more resilient during storms? Are you putting solar panels on your house? What do you want to see for a sustainable Brunswick? There's a bunch of questions. Post-it note up all of those sheets of paper. And then finally, over here on your left. So we have two posters that are showing kind of the initial results of the community survey. I will say I think I put those together last week, and even I checked the survey this morning, and I think there's already at least 50 to 75 more responses than what are on that poster. So you're doing great. There's been a ton of responses, and also we've interviewed, as I mentioned, staff. And also Ashley and Addison interviewed some community organizations to understand what are their concerns. So we've got some bubbles on that. But then these papers over here are really starting to get at those priorities. We want you to take some green dots and red dots and post-it notes if you have comments, and sticky them up for green, ideally top 3, areas that you want the town to prioritize. Ones that you think are the most important. And red dots don't mean that they're not important, but it just means that you don't think they should be a top priority. And I know a lot of people have trouble putting red dots. You don't want to, you're like, everything's so important. And I get that, but it's also really interesting to start to see how different people think. And if you start to see that, yes, everyone has red dots on one area, doesn't mean that we're not going to create action for it, doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just means that might be more challenging. It might be something that happens a little later, but really seeing that contrast and starting to make those decisions about, okay, at some point funding is going to play an issue. Where are we directing our money? Seeing some of those red dots are helpful and important. So I encourage you, we're not going to be sticklers about, it says do 3 green, 3 red. That's ideal. I'm not a stickler about it. If you really have a 4th one, by all means, I won't hinder you. But if you also have ideas or comments, or this is where you're like, I already have a strategy or something that I want, put a Post-it note on it. Write it up. We want to see these, again, covered. Again, I know I'm a broken record. I say Post-it notes, stickies, all of those, but we really want your feedback. We want your input. We want to know what you're thinking. So with that, I will, I think, end this presentation, let you break out. We have members from the task force, from GP-COG, around. Please feel free to ask us questions. I believe let's see, what time is it? It is 7 o'clock. At about 7:30, 7:40, we're going to reconvene, and we'll kind of share out a little bit as to what we've heard at some of our stations, and then also open it up for Q&A. That way you might be able to ask some questions during this time, and then we can hear what everyone else is saying. I know not everyone feels comfortable asking questions in public, so please feel free to come find any of us. But otherwise, please grab some food, explore the posters, write on the map, and then we will reconvene in about half an hour, 45 minutes. Not trying to stop your exciting conversations. Can quietly continue your invigorating, enthralling climate change conversations. If you want, you can come back and sit. We're gonna kind of talk through maybe what some of us have heard, but also open it up to any broader Q&A that we will pass around the microphone if you have questions that you would like to ask. Have heard some very interesting conversations already about, whether it's your own personal adaptation to climate change, what you are doing, concerns about commercial industries and making sure that they are also involved in how across Brunswick we can get the kind of biggest emitter for commercial energy on board, or for commercial emissions, how to get them on board and fix some of their emissions. So I will open it up if anyone has any Q&A, and I'm not saying that you have to leave right after this, but does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams, aspirations you would like to share with the rest of us?
There's a new organization in Maine called Climate Work that Alan Caron started. And for those businesses in town that are looking for ways to do something about this problem, that might be something to refer them to.
No, that's a great reminder. And yes, a lot of great organizations are starting up and really providing kind of input and expertise in this area. And so that's a great reminder, and also things that we can always call out throughout the process as to organizations, whether in Brunswick, across Maine, that are really helping and making sure that we connect with them. So thank you.
Yeah, I had a real nice talk with Rebecca over here.
Can you talk a little louder? Sorry.
Okay.
This doesn't connect this will be this is for the first.
That microphone really doesn't do anything. Yes.
Like I said, I was talking with Rebecca, had a nice conversation with her. When I look online at some of the climate change, global warming type things, it says that Maine is basically 85 to 90% forest. So I know that we said we have a carbon footprint in Brunswick of 100,000 metric tons, and we needed, it shows like 11,000 acres to counter that. Well, we've got 17.5 million acres of trees in Maine. You know, are we taking advantage of that offset such that we don't need to go overboard on carbon footprint reduction from fossil fuels and such? I know that we'd like to try to do that, but I also am very concerned about the impact on the average person in Maine, especially in Brunswick. Because we're all in Brunswick. I've seen my taxes double twice because of a reassessment, and on top of that, just increase in taxes. The water and sewer has doubled at least twice in the last 10 years. And I've also seen it being a very significant impact on people in our association. We have 50 units, 50 homes of people that are on Social Security. And I know that, and I also talked to Rebecca, I think she gave you good insight on how we're doing the program. That there might be, government guidance and intervention and such. And to me, that always means higher taxes. Now, that might not be the case, but what I'm saying is I think I would hope that the committee would keep that in mind. Well, first of all, with Maine having such a high tree population, 17.5 million acres of trees to help us in this effort, that it doesn't get to the point where by 2050 or 2030, we're mandated to shift to electric vehicles. Because you've got to ask yourself, what's going to power the electric vehicles? You're going to plug it into the wall. Well, what's powering that? Well, it's going to be high-powered generators, which are nuclear, LP gas, coal, and things like that. And just to replace one 500 megawatt LP gas generator, if you shift to solar, you're looking at basically 6,000 to 10,000 acres of land to support something like that. And it's millions of solar cells, I'm sure you've heard of all. It equates the same thing to a lower degree on wind. So you're looking at the effect on the environment of something like this to try to reduce a carbon footprint. And I'm not totally convinced that the carbon footprint is the problem. I think there's a huge cosmic issue around our solar system. Just look at the solar system, look at all the other planets, and their means of heating. They're heating up. Okay? So we're not the only ones seeing the effect of this. But just sticking with the carbon footprint, again, I would hate to see us go overboard regulation such that people that are already taxed and have issues paying their bills, feeding themselves, prescriptions, drugs, or the whole thing, that they are considered when this organization, this committee goes forward with their recommendations, because the impact is obviously huge, not just from the carbon footprint, but the effect on the people of Maine, especially here in Brunswick.
Yes. No, what you said, very good points. And this is a municipal climate action plan. And so it is looking at also what the municipality can do to not just put all of the burden on the individual. Because I agree, the climate problem is not really always going to be solved just by the individual. There's a lot of other systems and things in place that need to happen. And so that is also how can the town communicate and partner with other organizations and help that going on. The one thing that I will say, as you're saying, forests, definitely yes. Part of the reason we use the term net zero, which I can also explain a little more, is to try and take those emission reductions, but sometimes you're right, you can't always get that to zero, and so how can you then offset that with some of the other forests and the things going on? Maine is lucky that we do right now have a large forested area, and that is an option, is to kind of help conserve that. It is also still a problem at the state that a lot of it is still private land that can be sold, that can be developed, that might still be a part of the timber industry and things of that sort. And so even though it's forested right now, we still have to make sure that it will stay forested in the future to be able to supply those carbon sinks as well. But it is definitely something that the town can look into as to how do we offset this? How do we take steps to reduce our emissions to where we can, but then also how do we offset what we can't? So I think that's also a good reminder and something to think about, and that's also what we try and stress, is that there are different people and we don't want to put that burden all on them either. There are different ways to fund different areas. That doesn't mean always increasing taxes. It can be other grants. The state and federal government right now are working and putting a lot of money in towards updating the grid to be able to support a lot of that electricity generation that, a lot of strategies right now suggest. As you said, if you're converting to hybrids and you're going to use more electricity, how does it support that? Is that clean? So there's still a lot of funding and things going for that, but I think you raise a lot of really good points, and to remember for the task force, for the town, for GPCOG, to remember that it is not just a burden for the individual, but it is a municipal, a regional, a state effort as well. So thank you. Not necessarily a problem, but it's just one thing to consider.
I think it's more smoothly one that, looking around the room, there isn't enough of the forest in Brunswick. The state is growing out of Maine, is growing the forest. They're expanding the forest. And when I look around Brunswick, there's a lot of clearing. And I'm from Northern Maine, I've been in Brunswick for 6 years. I've been shocked by how much forest is cleared, yet how much people in Brunswick care about how much clearing is going on in Northern. So they're actually just supplying forest products for the consumer demand, nothing else going on. But I think we need to take care of what we're doing here, because there's a lot of development. Every time I go down the road, I see developments clearing, three-quarters of the soil carbon that we all talk about is in the soil, the forest soil, not the trees, in the soil. So when you go in and disturb the soil, the development, the foundation, roads, and etc., you're causing great impact and you're clearing it for field. So I just want to throw that out there. I think forests are a solution, and it's going to be done well. But I just wanted to clarify the appreciate that, and I know there's a problem that I should really disagree with it, but I understand.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, did not, and I appreciate the clarification of a lot of, sometimes what is currently forests are privately owned, that they can be sold off for development, and then we lose our forest, as you say, is happening around Brunswick. And I agree, I think it is important to make sure that, to be able to maintain that. And they're talking with staff and other organizations. There is, and honestly other towns too, there's this constant push-pull between wanting development, economic development, land use, conservation, wanting open space, how do you grow smartly? You know, where do you grow? And so there's a lot of tension between people's values in forests, in open space, in conservation, and development across most towns in Maine that are trying to be looked at.
Can I say one thing about
Yep.
I think that, I don't know what Brunswick, kind of Brunswick's paper or sourcing policy is, but there are mills like in New York, or like on the road, that print all your printing paper, that's certified, forestry council, do a little logo on it. You know, stuff like that are small things, you have preference for FSC. There's a ton of paper here being used tonight, and that's one thing. And then you got the Hancock lumber, Hammond lumber, I mean, there's solid pine, and Elgrade, it's on the Hancock, South Casco Bay, or
Casco.
the big lake up here.
Sebago. Yep.
You know, using local materials is important. Don't buy wood from Idaho, don't buy wood from the tropics, don't buy wood from Indonesia. Buy from Hammond lumber, buy local, you're saving a lot in transportation costs and FEMA.
Yep.
Thank you.
Nope.
I think it's great. You guys-
Good reminder. Thank you.
One of the biggest challenges of the task force is it's usually very short term. I'm very aware of this one. I've been trying to follow it online. You're not keeping minutes. It's very hard to really get the essence of what's happening. We've had 8 meetings so far. I just want to suggest you really consider how to keep the educational aspect of all your work, all your wonderful charts, alive and going. I am absolutely convinced that climate will add a great force to that necessity, but this is what planning is about. How to bring this into the community on an ongoing basis. Can there be a committee within the municipal government that is permanent, endless, because this is an endless question. Likewise, my wife said, where's something happening with the schools? I know things are happening, but is that part of your charge also, to look at the school system and the education, and how can that be sustained? We're really talking about sustaining for many generations.
Yes. So one thing I'll say, as we develop actions and strategies, we will also assign responsibilities as well. So it might not always fall to one committee. I know Brunswick has a lot of committees. You do have an answer, but I was going to say, you have a lot. Oh, great.
Sure, we're going to be actually running this very same program with students at Brunswick High School on October 13th. And the students are taking the exact same survey, and we're going to be able to chunk out all of their responses and talk about that. So that's what's going on.
Yep. The town has done a great job of involving the school, and even then, again, for long-term and other strategies of making sure that the school is involved, that other committees are picking up the actions, even if the task force will be ending after this process, to kind of assign how do we continue that outreach, whether it's with the schools, whether it's with the community, different groups. So we want to make sure that we do assign kind of responsibilities for each of those actions.
I was remiss to not thank Ashley for leading this and developing the relationship that she had between the town and the school, and our superintendent is very much behind us.
Ashley really has done a great job, above and beyond. You should thank her a lot. Yes, and I thank you, because I was very remiss in not thanking ahead of time. So Eileen Johnson, who is a professor at Bowdoin College, who also helped develop the Maine Social Vulnerability Index, is a partner on this project. So we meet with her and we talk through the process, and she will be reviewing information. She has already helped give us a lot of information. We are talking about it. Again, with her, she is a partner in this. So we have been coordinating with Bowdoin in that way. As Mark and Rebecca said, we also had a great intern, Addison, who was here from Bowdoin and going back, and we're still working to develop more of those relationships because we understand that, you know, they are a big part of this, and a lot of times that communication doesn't always cross the campus divide, but there has been communications between the town with their sustainability coordinator and things of that sort, and so it's definitely an action to try and get the school more involved and more aware of what's going on. The students do have the opportunity to take the survey and trying to push that. We aren't holding a separate workshop, but.
So I have to work, and so I can tell you that we publicize it on campus. We are reaching out, they're having a sustainability fair, and our building president, and Keisha Mason, who's the sustainability coordinator on campus, was going to be here this evening, but couldn't make it for boundaries, but she'll be at the next workshop. So there's definitely a lot of cross fertilization going on.
Thank you.
You just mentioned that Bowdoin is part of, is that true? So Bowdoin has their own climate action plan. So in a way, it's kind of like the cross fertilization is, we're going to take a little bit from them, I'm assuming, too. So they certainly are doing certain things, but I think it will be helpful to know.
Oh, no, I was just going to say the same thing about the sustainability fair next Friday.
I just wanted to say that you've done a tremendous job, and I'm very impressed. There's one area that hasn't been mentioned, and maybe that's too scary or something, but the whole area of eating meat, that red meat and the consumption of red meat uses so much of our resources in water and transportation and that kind of thing. And we really need to be encouraging, not mandating, but encouraging people to eat a more vegetarian-based diet.
Thank you. Yep.
So the Inflation Reduction Act has a huge number of incentives, rebates, and tax credits for Americans. And I don't think a lot of us know about them. And I'm interested, and I'd love to see your committees do some research on the effectiveness of social marketing that would alert people that, hey, somebody else on my street has done this and this and this. I mean, without invading privacy or anything, but we know that when people see stuff happening around them that sounds like it makes sense and saves money in the long run, it makes sense to get on board. And I think that you don't have to require anybody to do anything to have an effective social marketing campaign. And I think there could be something to be learned from that national level.
I think there is for both of those comments, strong education outreach, which will be needed for a part of the plan and for, pushing a lot of strategies and actions going forward. So, yep. Okay, yep. It is 8 p.m. I want to thank everyone again for coming. Please, we'll be cleaning up, but please make sure you get any comments down. Please tell all of your neighbors, friends, anyone else that you know. Go to www.brunswickclimateaction.org. Make sure you put the www in there. Some devices have trouble with the website. And get them to fill out all of the forms. But we thank you very much for coming. Take any food as well, and take the survey, enter the raffle, and we hope to hear from you again and look for the next workshop in January. Thank you.